In ancient history, few rulers have been remembered with as much fear and fascination as Cambyses II, son of Cyrus the Great and second monarch of the Achaemenid Empire of Persia. His reign, which spanned from 530 BC to 522 BC, is one of the darkest and most enigmatic of antiquity. Not only because of the military campaigns that further expanded the immense Persian Empire, but also due to a series of brutal acts, irrational decisions, and rumors of madness that made him one of the most disturbing kings of his time. Born around 589 BC, Cambyses inherited an empire that was already the largest in the known world. His father, Cyrus the Great, had conquered Babylon, Lydia, and much of Mesopotamia. But while Cyrus was seen as an enlightened leader, even respectful of the cultures he conquered, as when he allowed the Jews to return to Jerusalem, Cambyses took a very different path. Although he achieved an unprecedented feat by conquering Egypt, his way of ruling and certain accounts of his behavior led many to portray him as a cruel, even insane tyrant. One of the most chilling episodes attributed to Cambyses, and the one that gives this story its name, is the tragic anecdote of how he accidentally ate his own son. This story, recorded by the Greek historian Herodotus, describes a dinner filled with tension, confusion, and horror. According to the account, Cambyses ordered a special dish to be prepared for him. But something went terribly wrong. Unaware, the king ended up consuming human flesh, and not just any flesh, that of his own son. Although this account has been questioned by many modern historians, it was none other than Herodotus, considered the father of history, who recorded it. And while his narratives mix verifiable facts with legends and rumors, his influence on the historical perception of Cambyses has been immense. It was he who painted the Persian king as a man full of arrogance, cruelty, and a kind of divine madness that led him to defy even the sacred customs of the peoples he dominated. But what drove such a powerful king to fall into such extremes? Was he truly mad, or simply a brutal ruler who was misunderstood by his Greek enemies? To understand the figure of Cambyses II, it is essential to grasp the context in which he operated. The Achaemenid Persian Empire, a superpower of the ancient world that stretched from Asia Minor to Pakistan. Upon assuming the throne after the death of his father Cyrus the Great in battle, 530 BC, Cambyses not only inherited a vast territory, but also an immense responsibility, maintaining stability and continuing the expansion of the empire. From the beginning of his reign, Cambyses showed a personality different from that of his father. While Cyrus was known for his relatively tolerant and respectful policy toward local religions and cultures, Cambyses adopted a more authoritarian and dismissive stance. This attitude was especially evident during the conquest of Egypt, one of the greatest military achievements of his reign, and also one of the episodes that fueled his reputation as a cruel madman. In 525 BC, Cambyses launched a campaign against the Kingdom of Egypt, then ruled by Pharaoh Psamtik III. The invasion was a resounding success thanks to the support of an Egyptian defector, General Phanes of Halicarnassus, who provided key information about Egyptian defenses. The decisive battle took place at Pelusium, where the Persians defeated the Egyptian army. It is said that Cambyses used a macabre psychological tactic. He ordered his soldiers to carry cats and other sacred animals to force the Egyptians to hold their fire, as they feared killing creatures considered divine. After the victory, Cambyses proclaimed himself pharaoh and adopted the Egyptian name Mesutaire as a symbol of legitimacy before the conquered people. However, his behavior toward the local culture was anything but reverent. Herodotus recounts how he desecrated royal tombs, mocked sacred rites, and even ordered the sacrifice of the Apis bull, a highly venerated deity in ancient Egypt. These actions, seen as blasphemies, sowed hatred among the Egyptians and contributed to painting him as an impious and possibly insane man. But was Cambyses really mad? Or was he simply acting with imperial arrogance? For many modern historians, the answer lies somewhere in between. While certain acts may have been exaggerated by hostile Greek sources, such as Herodotus, there is enough evidence, including Persian and Egyptian texts, to suggest that Cambyses not only disdained other religions, but also struggled internally with the weight of absolute power. This tension between ambition and paranoia led him to make extreme decisions, some of which deeply affected his own family. Cambyses II's personal life was as dark as his public image. Although history remembers him for his military campaigns and alleged madness, very little is known with certainty about his closest circle. However, one fact stands out in ancient sources: his conflicted relationship with his brother Bardia, also known as Smerdis, according to the Greeks. Bardia was the son of Cyrus the Great and younger brother of Cambyses. Some versions suggest that he was highly popular among the Persian people, something that deeply troubled the king. According to Herodotus, before leaving for Egypt, Cambyses secretly ordered one of his most loyal guards, Prexaspes, to kill Bardia to prevent possible attempts at usurpation during his absence. But that's not all. There are indications that after killing him, Bardia's body was thrown into a river or even disappeared without a trace. This episode sowed a historical doubt that would mark the rest of Cambyses' reign. When he returned from Egypt, he faced an internal rebellion. And to his surprise, the leader of this insurrection bore the name Bardia. Could it be his brother, miraculously alive? Or worse still, had he killed his brother? And now another man was taking his place, using his identity to claim the throne. This confusion plunged Cambyses into extreme paranoia. It is said that he began seeing ghosts, hearing voices, and constantly fearing for his life. Amidst this climate of fear and suspicion, one of the darkest episodes of his reign unfolded: the tragic dinner where he accidentally ate his own son. According to Herodotus, Cambyses had ordered a special dish to be prepared, perhaps as part of some ritual or simply as a display of his royal extravagance. However, a terrible mistake occurred in the kitchen. Instead of serving him animal meat, they served him human flesh, and not just any flesh, but that of his own son. The king, oblivious to the horror he was consuming, ate throughout the meal. It was only at the end that the truth was revealed to him. Some versions suggest that it was Cambyses himself who requested the dish, believing it to be a test of loyalty from his court. Others suggest it was a deliberate act of revenge by someone seeking to destroy him psychologically. What is certain is that upon discovering he had eaten his own son, Cambyses fell into a state of profound shock. Some say he wept for days, while others claim he became even more cruel. The only thing clear is that from that moment on, his mental health began to deteriorate rapidly. The death of his son, and the fact that he had unknowingly consumed him, seems to have been the point of no return for Cambyses II's mind. From that moment on, his decisions became even more irrational, his actions more violent, and his paranoia almost absolute. But it wasn't just this episode that marked his downfall. There were also rumors of rebellion, shadows of the past, and a court full of intrigues surrounding him like a labyrinth from which he could no longer escape. One of the immediate effects of the tragedy was his attitude toward the men around him, especially those who had been close to him. Herodotus recounts that after discovering what had happened, Cambyses summoned the officer responsible for serving him the meal and asked if he knew what he was eating. The man replied that he did, and that it had been part of a higher order. However, other versions suggest it was a trap orchestrated by someone within the court to sow fear and confusion in the king. Be that as it may, the result was brutal. The officer was executed immediately, but not with a swift death. He was subjected to public torture, and some sources indicate that he was even dismembered in front of other courtiers as a warning. No one plays with the king, not even by mistake. This act of extreme violence only heightened the climate of terror in Persia. The news spread quickly, and with it grew rumors that Cambyses had completely lost his mind. Some began to see him as a man possessed by dark forces, while others simply considered him an unpredictable tyrant who could no longer govern with stability. But while this was happening in the court outside the palace, a political storm was brewing. During his absence in Egypt, the seeds of a rebellion had been sown, and now it was flourishing with great force. And to Cambyses' horror, the leader of this insurrection was none other than a man claiming to be his brother Bardia, whom he himself had ordered killed years earlier. How was this possible? Hadn't Bardia died? Or had it all been a farce? This uncertainty created a climate of total madness in the king. It is said that he began having visions, hearing voices at night, and seeing figures in the shadows of the palace. Some witnesses claimed he would talk to himself for hours, repeating the names of people who were no longer alive. This spiral of paranoia led him to make even more extreme decisions. In one of his darkest moments, he ordered the execution of several of his own generals, falsely accusing them of treason. Others were imprisoned without trial. The streets of Susa and Pasargadae were filled with rumors of a king who was no longer human, but a creature dominated by fear, vengeance, and remorse. And meanwhile, the rebellion grew. The rebellion looming over the Persian Empire was no ordinary one. It was a direct challenge to the legitimacy of Cambyses II, and it came at a moment of maximum weakness for the king. After the death and subsequent consumption of his son, his mind was fractured, his judgment clouded, and his authority shaky. But if there was one thing clear to the Persian king, it was that this man claiming to be Bardia could not be his brother. Or could he? According to Herodotus and other ancient sources, the supposed Bardia leading the insurrection was actually a magus named Gaumata, who had taken advantage of the confusion caused by the real Bardia's disappearance to usurp his identity. This magus, known for his ability to mimic voices and gestures, claimed to be Cambyses' lost brother, and quickly gained support among the Persian elites and subjects dissatisfied with the bloody and erratic reign of the king. Gaumata not only used his physical resemblance and acting skills to convince many, but also an intelligent propaganda campaign. He promised lower taxes, amnesties for criminals, and a return to more tolerant policies toward local religions. Everything that Cambyses had not represented. This allowed him to recruit powerful allies and consolidate control over large parts of the empire, while Cambyses was still in Egypt. When the king received news of the rebellion, his reaction was immediate and violent. He ordered his generals to rush back to Persia, and he himself set out on the journey back, though no longer as a firm leader, but as a man haunted by ghosts. However, during the journey, another tragic event would seal his fate. While mounting his horse, Cambyses suffered a fatal accident. The scabbard of his sword accidentally opened, and the blade pierced his thigh, causing a mortal wound. Some versions suggest it was a disguised suicide, others that it was a murder orchestrated by someone close to him. But what is certain is that the king knew his end had come. In his final days, aware that he could not recover, Cambyses made a shocking revelation to his men. He confessed to having killed his brother Bardia years earlier. This admission not only confirmed the worst rumors about his cruelty, but also undermined any argument he could have used to invalidate the false Bardia. If he himself had ordered his brother's death and no one had seen the body, who could prove that this new Bardia was not real? This final testimony was recorded by later historians, including Darius I, who years later recounted the events in the famous Behistun inscription, one of the few non-Greek sources that mention Cambyses in detail. In it, Darius states that the real Bardia had been executed by Cambyses' order before the Egyptian campaign, and that Gaumata had skillfully replaced him. With his health deteriorating and the empire slipping from his grasp, Cambyses died shortly after the accident in 522 BC, just a few months after committing the darkest act of his life, accidentally eating his own son. His death marked the end of a chaotic reign, filled with glorious conquest but stained by madness, paranoia, and extreme violence. And although he managed to expand the Persian Empire to its greatest territorial extent, from Libya to Pakistan, his legacy would be overshadowed by the horrors he left behind. But the story of Cambyses does not end with his death. In fact, his shadow would continue to loom over Persian politics for decades. The impostor Gaumata ruled briefly as Bardia, until he was overthrown and assassinated by a group of nobles led by Darius I, who took the throne and founded a new dynasty. And while Darius officially erased Cambyses' name from the official Persian history, branding him a heretic and tyrant, his figure survived in Greek accounts, Eastern myths, and the dark chronicles of antiquity. He would be remembered not only for his military victories, but for that fateful dinner, for that devoured son, for that broken mind under the weight of the crown. Was Cambyses mad, or simply a man who succumbed to the weight of absolute power? The story of Cambyses II is one of the most enigmatic of antiquity. A king who inherited the largest empire in the known world, who conquered Egypt and extended Persian borders to unprecedented limits, but who was also portrayed as a cruel tyrant, a man obsessed with control, death, and perhaps even his own destruction. His figure has been the subject of debate among historians for centuries. Was he truly mad, or simply a victim of a hostile narrative written by his Greek rivals? Herodotus, considered the father of history, dedicated several sections of his work to portraying Cambyses as an unbalanced, irreverent, and brutal monarch. According to Herodotus, Cambyses desecrated Egyptian tombs, mocked sacred rituals, killed priests and divine animals, and even ordered the execution of his own brother to eliminate any threat to the throne. But what caught the attention of the Greeks most was the anecdote about how he accidentally ate his own son. This account, though it may seem exaggerated, makes a certain kind of sense within the historical context. In an absolutist court where fear was commonplace, where generals feared delivering bad news and servants acted under strict orders, such a grotesque mistake was not impossible. And if it did happen, as many believe, then it reflects something much deeper than a simple culinary mishap. It shows the extreme dehumanization of absolute power, where even family ties can break under the weight of paranoia. But how did Cambyses reach that point? Was he truly mad, or was he simply surrounded by an environment that prevented him from acting rationally? An interesting theory proposed by some modern historians is that Cambyses may have suffered from some form of psychological disorder, perhaps exacerbated by the extreme stress of imperial governance. Others argue that he was not mad, but deeply insecure, a man who constantly lived in the shadow of his father, Cyrus the Great, whose legendary figure weighed like a mountain on his shoulders. Cyrus had been a respected leader, even by his enemies. He was remembered for allowing the Jews to return to Jerusalem after the Babylonian exile, for respecting local religions, and for ruling with a mix of strength and diplomacy. In contrast, Cambyses had to prove that he could be even stronger, even more relentless. Some believe that this drive to surpass his father led him to commit increasingly extreme acts, as if he constantly needed to prove his absolute dominance. There are also those who see in him a precursor to the darkest Roman emperors, such as Caligula or Nero, men who, after ascending to supreme power, lost touch with reality and began to view human lives as mere chess pieces in a game of authority. Another interpretation suggests that many of the accusations against Cambyses were fabricated or distorted by hostile sources, especially Greek ones. The Greeks had reasons to demonize him. After all, he had invaded Egypt, one of the countries most admired by Hellenic philosophers for its ancient wisdom and culture. Seeing a foreign king desecrating temples and killing sacred animals was a moral offense that needed to justify his downfall. Even the episode of eating his own son could have a symbolic or ritualistic explanation. Some ancient cultures practiced cannibalistic rituals as part of initiation or purification ceremonies. Although there is no direct evidence that this occurred in Persia, the account may have been used as a metaphor for his total loss of humanity. What does seem clear is that his reign marked a turning point in the dynamics of the Persian Empire. After his death, the impostor Gaumata briefly took control, but was overthrown by Darius the Myrs, who established new rules of governance and systematically erased Cambyses from the official history. Darius branded him a heretic, a murderer, and an enemy of the collective memory of the empire. In the famous Behistun inscription, Darius claims that Cambyses killed his brother Bardia and then lost his mind, committing acts unworthy of an Achaemenid king. This version became the official narrative, and with it, the image of Cambyses was forever sealed as one of the darkest kings in ancient history. But behind all those accounts, those legends and rumors, one question remains unanswered. What really happened at that fateful dinner? The dinner that ended in tragedy. That is the darkest core of Cambyses II's legacy, and perhaps one of the most shocking episodes in ancient history. But what really happened? Was it a tragic mistake, a macabre joke of the court, or even a deliberate conspiracy to destabilize the king? According to Herodotus, after returning from his failed campaign in Egypt and facing news of a rebellion led by a false Bardia, Cambyses was sunk in a state of constant paranoia. Betrayals, shadows of the past, and the weight of power had driven him to the brink of madness. It was then that a dinner was held in his palace, during which he was served human flesh, and not just any flesh, that of his own son. Herodotus recounts that Cambyses unknowingly ate throughout the meal. Only at the end was the truth revealed to him. Some versions indicate that it was Cambyses himself who ordered the dish as part of some ritual of testing or symbolic punishment. Others suggest it was a trap, orchestrated by someone within the court with the aim of sowing terror and confusion in the king. What is certain is that the news completely shattered him. Some witnesses claimed that the king wept inconsolably for days, while others said he simply fell silent, staring into the void as if he had completely lost his mind. This event seems to have been the definitive breaking point. From that moment on, his decisions became even more erratic, his judgment darker, and his behavior more unpredictable. But how is it possible that something like this could have happened? How could such a grotesque mistake occur in a royal court? To understand it, we must remember how royal courts functioned in antiquity. In them, the king was almost seen as a god, and his orders were followed to the letter, without question. If Cambyses ordered a special dish, no one dared to ask exactly what it contained. Moreover, in a society where absolute loyalty was commonplace, many servants were willing to do anything, no matter how absurd or cruel, to gain the monarch's favor. We must also consider that in some ancient cultures, especially in ritual or ceremonial contexts, there were symbolic practices that might appear as cannibalism from a modern perspective. Although there is no direct evidence that this occurred in Persia, some historians have suggested that the account might have a symbolic rather than literal basis. Perhaps the son was not a biological son but a beloved associate, and eating him symbolized a kind of purification or sacrificial ritual. However, the most widely accepted version among historians is that it was indeed a tragic mistake, though possibly influenced by the atmosphere of fear surrounding the king. A servant perhaps fearing for their life if they disobeyed a royal order, or perhaps deceived by another member of the court, might have prepared the wrong dish. And once the damage was done, there was no turning back. This act, whether accidental or not, deeply scarred the king. He not only lost his son, but also any remaining connection to his humanity. It is said that after this, Cambyses began seeing ghosts, hearing voices, and suspecting everyone around him. His decisions became increasingly irrational, his executions more brutal, and his paranoia absolute. Amidst this climate of chaos came the news that would seal his fate. A man claiming to be his brother Bardia had taken control of much of the empire. And although Cambyses knew that he himself had ordered his brother's death years earlier, no one had seen the body. And now someone was using his name to claim the throne. This revelation sent him into a downward spiral. The idea that his brother might have survived, or worse still, that someone was impersonating him, filled him with panic. He decided to return immediately to Persia to regain control. But along the way, he suffered a fatal accident. While mounting his horse, his sword accidentally came loose and mortally wounded him in the thigh. As he lay dying, Cambyses made a final confession. He had killed his brother Bardia before leaving for Egypt. This admission, later recorded by Darius I in the Behistun inscription, confirmed one of the darkest rumors about his reign. But it also raised new questions. Who was this man pretending to be Bardia? An imposter? A perfect double? Or perhaps the ghost of the past avenging the king? With his death, the Persian Empire entered a new era. The imposter Gaumata would rule briefly until he was overthrown by Darius I, who established a new dynasty and systematically erased Cambyses from the official historical record. But although the official records tried to bury his memory, his legacy survived in myths, Greek accounts, and the dark chronicles of antiquity. He would be remembered not only for his conquests, but for that fateful dinner, for that devoured son, and for that broken mind under the weight of the crown. Was Cambyses mad? Or simply a man who succumbed to the weight of absolute power? That question, like so many others about his figure, remains unanswered. The reign of Cambyses II was a dark mirror of absolute power, a distorted reflection where total control turns into emotional chaos, where divine authority becomes corrupted into tyranny, and where even the most sacred bonds, such as paternal love, can break under the weight of a crown. The story of how he accidentally ate his own son is not only one of the most shocking tales of antiquity, but also a perfect metaphor for his life. A man who believed he had everything under control, until he discovered he couldn't even protect his own blood. This episode, though surrounded by historical doubts, symbolizes something much deeper: the extreme isolation of power, the disconnect from reality experienced by many absolute rulers, and how irrational decisions can easily turn into irreparable tragedies. At that tragic banquet, not only did a son die, something inside Cambyses' soul died as well. His death shortly thereafter, accidental or perhaps symbolic, marked the end of a reign full of contrasts. On the one hand, he had been a militarily successful leader, capable of conquering Egypt and further expanding the immense Persian Empire. But on the other, he left behind a climate of terror, suspicion, and chaos that facilitated rebellion and the rise of an imposter who usurped his brother's identity. Darius I, who took control after overthrowing the false Bardia, not only physically cleansed the kingdom of its shadows, but also erased Cambyses from the official Persian memory. He branded him a heretic, a murderer, and a madman, ensuring that history would remember him as a poor example of leadership. And so, for centuries, Cambyses was relegated to the rank of a legendary villain, a king whose name evoked fear rather than respect. However, behind that demonized image lies a complex figure. A man who lived under the immense pressure of being the son of Cyrus the Great, a father whose shadow was impossible to match, a monarch who tried to carve his own path, but may have been destined to fail under the weight of the legacy that preceded him. There are also those who see in him a precursor to the darkest emperors in history, those who, upon reaching supreme power, lose touch with humanity and end up consumed by their own ambition. His story resembles that of figures like Nero, Caligula, or even some later Russian czars, men who reached the highest peak, and from there, plunged into the abyss. But perhaps the most unsettling thing about Cambyses is not so much what he did, but what he represents. The fragility of sanity under the weight of a crown. How fear can corrupt even the strongest leaders, and how the most terrible mistakes are not always intentional, but rather the product of a system that allows them to happen. That fateful dinner, whether real or symbolic, remains a chilling reminder. At the heart of absolute power, sometimes beats something dark and unpredictable. Today, Cambyses II remains a fascinating figure for historians, writers, and lovers of the macabre. Not only because of his military victories or territorial expansion, but because of those dark acts that make him a unique case in ancient history. His legacy is not only political, but psychological, cultural, and moral. And though time has erased specific details of his life, one question remains relevant. What would have happened if that night, instead of serving human flesh, they had simply fed a hungry king? Perhaps then Cambyses would have had time to heal, to reflect, and to die not as a monster, but as a man.